How's it going, guys? My favorite topic today, I'm going to talk about compatibility between plum, peach, apricot, cherry, how to combine all these trees together using different stems. So this is going to be a little bit more technical info. And if you have not seen my Grafting for Beginners Part 3 video on compatibility between all these different fruits, go check that out first. And if you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. This helps my channel grow. And everybody give me a thumbs up on this video. The thumbs up really help the YouTube algorithm pick up and show my video to more people. So in this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about interstems, or bridge between different species to extend the lifespan of certain trees, because the graft union is a weak point between different species. So that's the reason why many trees will fail over longer periods of time, is because the grafting union fails. So I'm going to talk about that and how to extend the lifespan of your trees and which stems to use and the sort of the different combinations that I've used throughout the years, and give you some tips and tricks on how to dwarf your trees using interstems and stuff like that. So stay tuned, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and let's get going. Here is an example of an apricot grafted to plum. This is an apricot tree. It's grafted directly to plum. And just to summarize, the reason why anybody would want to do this is either they have an abundance of a certain type of tree on their yard and they want to graft it over to something else, or their soil won't allow for a certain species to thrive. Like for me, I can't get apricots and peaches to grow in my wet soil, so I graft everything to plum. The issue that one runs into when grafting apricot to plum or peach to plum is you end up with a weak point at the union where there's a long-term incompatibility issue that arises several years later. So notice, can't really see, any bulging or anything on this union. This apricot is still thriving. It's been like 4 years, I think, since I grafted this directly to the plum, and is doing fine. This is nectacotum, another interstem that I use between plum and peach. So the idea with interstems is to create a bridge between two different species to allow for longer life or better compatibility. So for example, nectacotum I use in between peach and plum because it shows the most characteristics that are halfway between the two species. I'll show you on the next tree here, where you can kind of see the similarity. Okay, so here's an example of a nectacotum branch that I pulled off of this tree here. I use nectacotum as an interstem between peach and plum because it shows the most halfway between characteristics of the two. If you notice, this is a peach, that's a peach, and this is nectacotum in my hand here. Look how similar they look. You look at the tip, the leaves, the twigs. So for grafting purposes, I'm kind of looking for wood, leaf, and growth characteristics to kind of match up to something that's halfway between. Since this is a hybrid and it has plum, peach, and apricot genetics, I think this nectacotum shows the most favorable characteristics to joining peach and plum together, because it just looks the most like halfway between the two. And so that's what I've been experimenting with lately, you can see it just looks so much like peach. This is the graft union. This is peach grafted to nectacotum, grafted to plum. So you have a little bridge here. And you can also have, you know, longer bridges. Here's another one. That's peach, nectacotum. And there's the graft union between nectacotum and plum. So notice the critical union still becomes here, where it looks like it's bulging a little bit more. But nonetheless, the graft union looks really good. And my hope is that this will extend the lifespan of the tree even longer, because grafting peach directly to plum, you end up with long-term incompatibility where the top part dies and then the rootstock just shoots out a bunch of suckers. Even though, you know, the rootstock was healthy, the top of the tree dies. And I've had that happen to many of my peach trees that were grafted directly to plum. And so this is the way to extend the lifespan of the tree. So this is just like a first year. All this entire tree here, all this growth came in one season. And so the vigor from the peach may be what's resulting in a bulge at the graft here. A lot of vigor. This is Saturn donut peach, grafted to nectacotum, grafted to plum. Here's another Saturn donut union to nectacotum. There's nectacotum sprouts and plum. There's the union between nectacotum and plum. Still looking better. But it just depends. So like some of the older grafts, I'll show you, they look very smooth. So like this one here, this nectacotum has been grafted to peach. I think, let me see here. Nectacotum grafted in 2020. It's 2023 now, so 3 years. 3-year union. Look at that. Very smooth all the way around. Look at that graft union right there. So this is nectacotum, peach. So this is the flop the other way around. The other ones I was showing you, we had nectacotum and then peach grafted to nectacotum. But that's what spurred my interest in using nectacotum as an interstem, because I saw this union and I was like, wow, this looks solid. So this hasn't been a thing yet. Using nectacotum as an interstem is my idea and my experiment. So I'm just hoping that this will work. You won't find any info on this online. This is strictly my experimentation and kind of my hope that it will work. But that's nectacotum for you. Look how similar it looks to peach. It's just so close, you know. You bring it up to a peach and it looks like it's halfway between plum and peach. That's why I want to use it as a halfway betweener, a bridge variety. This is Black Boy peach, grafted directly to plum. There's the union right there. This was grafted when? 2019, 2023 now. So 4 years. 4 years graft. And I've seen some pretty smooth, you know, peach to plum grafts that have failed, you know, several years later, and some that have thrived several years later. So it kind of depends on the conditions and the amount of stress, I guess, that the tree is in to force the graft to fail. But it's always the graft union that's the weak point when you're crossing species, because after the tree dies, the plum resprouts, so the roots don't die. This one shot out another shoot, and I put a nectacotum on it. So it's just kind of a measure to replace the original tree. If the original tree dies, I'm gonna put a peach onto this nectacotum. The other thing I wanted to say is, now I'm doing it now. I'm grafting higher when you're using plum as your rootstock to alleviate the problem with wet soil or heavy soil on peach, as well as alleviating the problem for peach tree borers. The borers tend to get in lower down near ground level. So if your stem of plum is higher off the ground, then your peach is safer up higher as well. So now I'm leaving a longer stem for the plum, and then I'm going to leave, a good amount of the nectacotum stem as well, and then I'm going to have the peach start at 3 or 4 feet high off the ground. So it raises up the height of your tree, but that's still a doable height, and that just keeps your tree safer from borers, because the borers don't bother our plums here. So this is a peach tree grafted to plum rootstock. These are the suckers that are coming out a couple feet from the tree. This is what the rootstock looks like. I do not know the cultivar of the rootstock. This is just some roots that I've been using for a very long time from a peach tree that died and the roots shot back out. So the original peach tree, I don't know where it came from, and it wasn't labeled with the root system either. So the tree died, and now I use this rootstock for peach. But even though the grafts on this rootstock seem to last a pretty long time, look how big this peach is. This is at least 8 years old, 7 to 8 years old. This is the graft union here. It's about 10 inches off the ground. I can see a little bit of gummy stuff coming out of the edges, so I don't know if the borers are getting in or what the issue is here, but usually right around year 10 and more for this rootstock, the trees seem to fail. At least they failed at my place like that. So this is still an ongoing experiment with this rootstock. These peaches still seem to be doing pretty well. They were loaded. This is a curl-free peach, and I grafted some other varieties onto here. So here's another example of peach grafted directly to plum. This one's about 1 foot off the ground, and if you get a close look, you see that? That's a little bit of a sign that there's some kind of incompatibility going on. I think that's like evidence of an issue with the graft. There's almost like a crack happening where the division line is between plum and peach. And so what will happen eventually is you'll see more and more of this bulge, you'll see more and more cracking, and eventually the top will die. And so I've allowed a sucker to grow, and I have grafted nectacotum to this. Let's see. There's nectacotum. Look how smooth that graft is. It's pretty cool. Nectacotum one more time next to peach. And this is going to be the replacement tree once the original dies. This one's only been grafted for like 4 years, and this one's already showing signs. This is Grand Coulee peach grafted to that same plum, unknown European plum rootstock that I have. And so next spring I will graft to nectacotum and create a replacement tree from the sucker that was produced by this root system. So I went over what I use for connecting plum and peach. Notice the theme here, everything's grafted to plum. Next one is apricot grafted to plum. And you've seen in the beginning of the video, I showed an apricot grafted directly to a plum tree. And this is an example of an interstem. The interstem that I use between apricot and plum is Thorotzeron black apricot. Zard on black stem on plum roots. So here's plum apricot hybrid called Thorotzeron black apricot, and then here's the apricot grafted to it right there. And this is a first year graft. It didn't fully heal yet, but it got there pretty quick. Look at all this growth in one season. That was a graft this spring. So I'm excited for this tree. Here is another tree. This is sugar pearls. Sugar pearls grafted to black apricot stem, grafted to plum. You can see the plum rootstock has shot out a bunch of suckers. Plum rootstock, and you can see that the top variety is apricot, starting to go dormant already. But notice the union between black apricot and the apricot is very smooth. You almost can't tell where the union is. This is the sugar pearls, this is black apricot. Look how smooth that is. And there's the black apricot with the plum. So this would create a solid combination. I'm always looking for smooth transitions. The less bulging, the better. Although bulging doesn't necessarily always mean that it's a bad union, but it's kind of an indicator oftentimes that there is an incompatibility in the union to some degree, which can fail in the long term. Even though it can survive for a few years, trees can die later. So that's the reason for using interstems, is to kind of make a bridge to help the tree to survive longer. The other reason you use interstems is for dwarfing purposes. I might talk about that later in the video. That would be for dwarfing, say, apples or pears, using a dwarfing interstem. So I might get to that at the end of the video, but let me just finish. So apricots grafted to plum roots. Here's another example. Apricot. This is actually Flavored Delight Aprium. Flavored Delight Aprium, which is a hybrid, but it shows more dominant characteristics of apricot, so I would consider it an apricot for grafting purposes, for grafting compatibility. So here it is, grafted to black apricot and grafted to plum. Here's another black apricot grafted to plum. So notice, yeah, the union between black apricot and plum seems to be like the more critical union here. It kind of bulges more. And then the union between, here's a tomcat apricot. See if I can unwrap this real quick. Notice the union here, black apricot with apricot, is very smooth, a very good combo. But black apricot does not always form this sort of bulge. It depends on which plum you graft it to. So this plum looks a little bit closer to Asian, variety. I don't know what these are, just kind of roots that I picked up from friends and family. But I noticed the black apricot forms a smoother union between between European plum and Florida black apricot. So for example, this one here is a Canadian white Blenheim. This is also a one-season graft. Notice it looks very smooth here. Graft union between apricot and Florida black apricot hybrid. If you move down to where the Florida is grafted to plum, to European plum, notice how smooth the union is. You can almost not see it. This is the union right there. Right there. It was a diagonal graft. Notice how smooth that is. European plum, black apricot, apricot. So I would say this is the best combo. Rootstock, say like St. Julian, is probably pretty close to European style plum roots. Would probably form a really good union with this as well. So yeah, black apricot, good stem. I think this is also my experimentation. This has not officially been done with any larger nurseries or larger experiments. So far this is just me doing it. I am hoping to spread some knowledge and spread some ideas. Hopefully some more people pick up on this and start doing this, experimenting with it, and coming back and let me know, hey, how did it go 5, 6, 7 years later down the road. So this is more of a long-term experiment. I'm more focused on seeing how long can I make the tree last when I graft different species together. This tree is a cherry grafted to plum rootstock using a Z stem bridge. You can see this is a cherry. Can't mistake that. Here is where the union is. Cherry grafted to the Z stem. Z stem looks like this. It's a plum. And you go far enough down, there's the union between Z stem and plum. So effectively what this does is now I can grow cherries on wet, heavy soil where cherries would normally not thrive. The only two stems that I know that can join cherry with plum, because cherry will not be compatible with plum directly. It's not like the peach and the apricot with plum, because you can put peach and apricot directly to plum and it'll survive for a good amount of years. Cherry will not do that. It will simply not combine with the plum unless you use Z stem or Adara plum. I'll show you an example of Adara in a second here. This is cherry grafted to Adara stem and grafted to plum roots. Here is Adara plum grafted to cherry. The union seems all right. Not exactly smooth, but does seem like it forms a decent union. Hasn't fully healed over yet. It's Adara. Adara looks very similar to Z stem, leaf characteristics and growth characteristics. It's basically the same species but different selections from the species. Cherry plum type of plum that was found to be compatible with cherry. This one was founded, I think, in Spain, if I remember correctly. This is Adara plum, very similar to Z stem. Now I'm doing an experiment with Rainier cherry on Adara. That's Rainier because Rainier died on Z stem. So it survived for 1 year, and then the next year it died when it was on Z stem. So I am seeing whether or not Adara has a little bit better compatibility with certain cherry cultivars, because it sounds like Z-stem does not support Rainier cherry or some of the bi-colored cherries. It seems to not be fully compatible with them. So Adara, this is the first year. I grafted it this spring, so we'll see if this remains compatible, because on the Z-stem, Rainier died the second year, so we'll see how long this one will hold up. Another one of my experiments. And normally you would trim all these stem branches. You don't want the stem to overpower the tree, but I need a little bit of cyanwood off of this, so I let it go. So this is Hawthorn. You can tell this is Hawthorn. It's thorny. A bunch of Hawthorn sprouts, and to Hawthorn I have grafted the shipova pear. Shipova pear. It has lost all its leaves, but you can tell that this is shipova pear. So the union between Hawthorn and shipova seems to be better than between Aronia and shipova pear, and so it might also be something to consider. You can use Hawthorn as a rootstock. The downside with using Hawthorn as a rootstock is it's so thorny, and you would have to be trimming all the suckers, and it would be difficult to trim because there's just so many thorns, just thorns everywhere that'll keep scratching you as you're trying to clean up the tree. But nonetheless, you would have a tree that's very resistant to wet soils, flooding, and heavy soils. Hawthorn thrives on roadsides everywhere. Its rootstock is almost impossible to kill. So if you have a difficult area and you're really trying to grow some pears and you can't get them to grow, perhaps this is an option for you. So here's a shipova pear grafted directly to mountain ash. This is the ash shooting out suckers from below, which I'll probably need to trim because these suckers are getting quite big now. Here's the graft union between shipova and mountain ash. Also a diameter mismatch. A little bit less than double mismatch I think here, but still quite a bit of diameter mismatch. And this tree already produced pears, so I'm pretty sure that if I grafted pear to shipova hybrid, it would thrive pretty well. I don't think there'd be an issue with graft compatibility between shipova and pear, because shipova has actually more characteristics towards pear than it does with ash. Here's another cool combination of a pear grafted to Aronia. This is the first time trying this. You can see this is an Aronia bush. Aronia berry actually is very nutritious and good berry for your health. I think this is the high bush variety, Titan. I think that's what this one's called. The low bush would be a little bit more difficult to graft onto because it would be more bushy, and this one can form a little bit better of a trunk to graft to without having to trim too much Aronia beneath it. But notice the graft union here. This is shipova pear, and this is Aronia. Look at that union. So you definitely see at least like double a diameter mismatch of double or more. So you know that there's quite a lot of incompatibility going on here. But nonetheless, look at the vigor. Shipova is actually a hybrid between ash and pear. Very tasty pear. And you can use it as a bridge between mountain ash and pear, as well as Aronia and pear. The benefit of doing this would be you have now effectively created a tree that can grow practically on a swamp. All this land floods here. This is a floodland, wetland. And so this survives with no issues, flying colors. So if I wanted to, I could now graft pear to these branches, and this will, the shipova ash hybrid will serve as the interstem between Aronia and pear. You can also do that between ash and pear. Yeah, this is another tree of shipova pear grafted to mountain ash. There's the ash, a whole bunch of bushy suckers coming from beneath. Now this was grafted with 2 twigs, one on either side here, and I didn't remove this one early on. I removed it later, which is why you see kind of a big bulge and a big branch removed here. I still want it to end up healing over as one instead of 2, so it doesn't split off later. So that's another thing you want to look out for when grafting, and both sides take. Keep one to a minimum to allow one to become more dominant, because otherwise you'll end up with something like this where you have to take out a bigger branch. If you end up leaving both, they'll split. If the fruit load is high and it gets windy, it'll just fall off the tree. The other thing that helps alleviate incompatibility is leaving a little bit of growth of the original rootstock below the tree, and I think that helps supply the rootstock with nutrients that the roots need if, say, the top variety is unable to provide them. Here's a pear tree that's grafted to apple rootstock. Look at all those flower buds. The pear has gone dormant. I actually thought that this graft has failed a year or 2 ago, but surprisingly it survived. There's the graft union. A pear grafted directly to crab apple, Pacific crab. I wish I knew what variety pear this was. This is unknown. Grabbed it from a friend, and I was experimenting many years ago, probably several years ago, and I just grafted it to that root sucker, and I ended up getting this pear to survive for this long. It's been at least 7 years. The rest of the tree is apple, and I think one of the reasons why it has survived for that long directly on apple roots is the rest of the tree has apple leaves to sort of help support the root system, whereas this is just like a side branch off the tree. And so if the roots really need a certain type of nutrient that perhaps the pear leaves can't provide, then the apple gets that taken care of, and this is just like surviving off of the edge of the tree, sort of just using the nutrients from the root system, and the root system can constantly keep providing and not be depleted in this situation. So sometimes you can graft, you can get away with grafts surviving on other species if you leave the original tree branches, at least some of them, to provide energy for the roots. So here's another example. I have quince grafted directly to apple. This is actually Pacific crab apple rootstock. And I also have apple grafted to it. And so they're growing on the same tree. Apple and quince. And I've actually had quince survive on an apple tree also for at least several years when grown in this fashion, where you have still apple branches on that same tree as the quince. Otherwise, the quince directly to apple seems to fail. Here's another useful combination, I think. This is an Apple-Quince hybrid called Sidus. And I grafted Aronia to that. So this is quince, Aronia quince on top, Sidus stem, apple rootstock. So this would be beneficial in areas with more flooding, I think, because from my experience, quince has not survived as well as apple during floods. And so I'm going to be experimenting with growing quince on apple roots as well as quince on pear roots, which I'll show you right now in a second what I would use as a stem between pear and quince. So this is Sidus. Notice how similar it looks to apple and quince. Very much 50-50 or halfway between quince and apple, which would make a very good interstem, I think. And I'm going to experiment with grafting this to apple, which I did. And notice here it is compared to an apple branch. That's apple right there, and that's Sidus. It's neither quince nor apple. Very cool. It's grafted to Pacific crab. Pacific crab can practically grow in swamps. Here's the graft union. Next step would be to graft quince to Sidus, and you'll end up with a bridge. It'll be Pacific crab, Sidus, quince apple hybrid, quince. That would give me the most flood resistant quince for my typical flooding wetland situation. So this is a stem that can be used to join apple, pear, quince, Aronia, ash, cottony aster, amelanchier, Hawthorn. This is said to be compatible with all of them. This is called Upros 6. However, it shows the most characteristics that look like quince. But this one's grafted to pear, and this one will most likely be compatible with all pear, unlike the usual quince rootstocks, which only are compatible with certain types of pears, and there are many pears that aren't compatible with it. This would ensure that all your pears are compatible with it. And pear rootstock just seems to do better than quince. It's a little counterintuitive because everybody's trying to grow pear on quince, but I am trying to grow quince on pear or quince on apple because quince trees just seem to die out here. I'll show you. So this was a quince tree and it died. There it is. So I don't know what happened. Most likely the root system just didn't handle all the moisture here. Right next to this tree is my Wixen crab. My Wixen crab apple that is grafted to Pacific crab, which is thriving in the same conditions. Wow, what a tasty apple. Cherry, that also died. Would not handle the moisture. So quince rootstock is just not quite as desirable as apple or pear. Another good way to use interstems is for dwarfing trees like apples and pears. You would have a full-size root system instead of a dwarfing root system, and then you would have a dwarfing interstem and your variety on top. Now this would cause the tree to be dwarfed without using dwarfing root system. Well, why would you do that? Well, dwarfing rootstock always falls over, so it needs staking more watering because the root system is not very deep, more care. And so this way you have a self-standing tree that's dwarfed, and it has better access to water, better stability, and all the benefits of a full-size rootstock. And also you get a smaller tree. But keep in mind that a dwarfing stem will only cause your tree to be like a semi-dwarf. It's not going to fully dwarf it if you were to put it directly onto fully dwarfing rootstock. Like this is a rubella grafted to Pacific crab with bud 9 dwarfing rootstock. This is going to create like a semi-dwarf. If I put it directly onto bud 9 rootstock, it would be a dwarf tree. So what you can do is you can use a mini dwarf stem to bottleneck the sap even more, and you can dwarf the tree even more using a mini dwarf stock, which is what I'm using for some of my newer experiments now. I use KD4. You can also use other smaller, less vigorous varieties than bud 9 to create your dwarfing interstem. With the dwarfing interstem, the longer your stem is, the more dwarfing effect you get. Essentially, the longer your bottleneck. With the cherry and the Z stem, it's the opposite. The closer you bring your cherry down to the plum rootstock with a smaller Z stem interstem, the smaller your tree is. Which it's kind of counterintuitive, but the reason is because with cherry, the stem is used as a bridge for compatibility. So the closer you bring that cherry down to incompatible wood, the less compatibility it has, and so it dwarfs the tree because of incompatibility. Here, the tree is dwarfed based on the length of the bottleneck. The more of dwarfing wood you have in between your apple and your apple rootstock, the more dwarfing you get on your apple and pear. So just something to keep in mind. So with pears, to dwarf your pear using an interstem, you would use something like this. This is Pear, a Ukrainian variety of pear that is dwarf, very dwarf. Essentially, you would use this as your stem between full-size pear rootstock, or you can even graft this stem to a pear seedling rootstock, and dwarf your pear tree without dwarfing roots. And so you end up with a self-supporting tree that is drought-resistant, wind-tolerant, no staking, all by just using a dwarfing interstem. So that's Pear. I might have that available to sell as scienwood in the coming years, however, not quite yet. I will throw in one more piece of info. If anybody is trying to grow the bush cherries like Carmine Jewel, Romeo, Cupid, and is curious what they can graft them to, you can graft them to Mahalab rootstock, and they will take. I have not had success with trying to graft these to sweet cherry or other cherry rootstock. They simply do not take. So this is the only success that I've had with trying to graft the bush cherries. You can graft them to Mahalab. One last thing before I wrap this video up. This is a hybrid between sweet and sour cherry called Chorna Kirka. You can see even the leaves and branches look like they're halfway between sweet and sour cherry. It's not sweet, not sour. It's like halfway between. This makes a very nice, dark, juicy, flavorful cherry that's not fully sweet and not fully sour. But another thing you could use this variety for is as a stem between sweet and sour cherry. I have sweet cherry rootstock here. This is the grafting union, a very smooth union, and you can graft sour cherry to this, sweet cherry to this, and it would make a really good union, in my opinion. So this would be another thing that I would experiment with. See if you can extend the lifespan of trees grafted to sweet cherry or sour cherry rootstock. I feel like sweet cherry rootstock does better in wetter soils, better than sour cherry. I've had a lot more sour cherry trees die on their own roots. So my suggestion would be grow sweet cherry roots and put your sour cherries on sweet cherry rootstock. It seems to have a little bit more resistance to wetter soils. That's probably going to be the wrap for my video. If you've made it this far, then you enjoyed the info. Don't forget to like my videos, subscribe to my channel, tell other people about my channel. This helps me grow, and I'm going to continue to learn and help spread and share knowledge that I accumulate over the years. So if you are subscribed, you'll get all the info and updates on when I upload new videos. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.